Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode. Unless you're watching this like years from now, and then this is not the latest episode. But thank you for joining us for rest. See, I have a great beginning and a great ending to this lockdown sessions. I got it down pat.
Highlight.
But we are brought to you every week, or every time we do this, by True Heel Heat Wrestling. Great podcast out of New York City, SB3. Always a guest on our podcast. And you know what? We're also brought to you by Stu's Wrestling Podcast because I love Stu. Stu Palmer does a great job. We're brought to you by Powered4 TV because we're going to talk about that today. Who else? We're brought to you by Wrestle Merch Center. We're brought to you by a lot of people. A lot of people like us. That's my point. But more importantly, a guy that I hope likes us from Powered4 TV, John Scott. John, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, buddy. My pleasure, and I'm happy to be here, buddy. It's going to be a good one. It's freezing cold in the UK. I have to say that. I know it's like over there at the moment in your neck of the woods, but it's getting really cold here.
Oh, I'm cold. I did something really stupid last night. I turned my heat way down, just because I was like, man, it's generally, obviously, I'm in Wisconsin, so we're cold anyway. But we've been having a nice, what we would call a heat wave. And there's a couple nights this last week where I'm like, man, I wake up and I'm pretty hot, so I'm kicking off the covers,
right? Yeah.
Turning the fan on. So I'm like, you know what? Obviously, I've got my heat a little bit too high. Turn it down. And I was kind of okay this morning, but you get up, and I took a shower. And when I get, if I'm out in the rain or whatever, I don't care if it's 70 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but if I get soaked by the rain, I'm cold. Like, I get chilled to the bone once I'm wet. So I took that shower, and now this is gonna be my first lockdown with a hoodie.
Wow.
Usually I just got my nice comfortable shirt on, and it's a reverse little Ryback throwback. So
nice.
So yeah, it's cold here. It's cold there. I always just assume it's cold there. You want to hear a funny story? And then when I used to work, I used to travel once a year. I would travel to Australia,
right.
New Zealand, and then immediately go to the UK. Well, this was in January. So summer in Australia and New Zealand, and then straight over to the UK. And I used to be fine, but the one year I went there was just rainy. We're out, and I was like, everybody's like, hey, we're going to go out there. I'm like, no, dude. I have to go and buy a jacket and some underwear. That was like I had to get it. I was just, I couldn't even, and it wasn't even cold for like, we get below zero down here in Wisconsin and frigid. And Celsius, I think it was like 35 degrees, and over there they were like, hey, we're going into deep freeze. And I'm like, dude, 35 degrees, we call that summer over here, but man, I was frozen. So now that everybody has tuned out and go, hey, I'm not going to listen to this idiot talk about the weather. Let's talk pro wrestling. Now, you were on the podcast last week, and what was awesome about that is I found out that you and I have a very similar love for like the older school pro wrestling. So talk to me now. You've got Powered4 TV. I know you do all kinds of podcasts, and I'm a journalist, so I've done no research, but talk to me about your, where did this love of pro wrestling come from?
Well,
were you?
The very beginning starts with my nan. She was a massive professional wrestling fan, World of Sport. And I would come in maybe some afternoons, and it would just be on the telly. They showed a lot of repeats back then. And they just used to be watching it like a TV show, just Sunday afternoon entertainment. I didn't really take too much notice of it until I saw like Big Daddy and then Giant Haystacks and then Mick McManus cutting like a promo, like really like as a villain. And it didn't seem too like theatrical as it is now. It seemed quite believable. So as a kid, it had a big impression on me. And then I would see these guys, not only does it have that element, but then they're getting in the ring and they're going to lock up. And of course, we've got the old rules in place as well. For anybody who doesn't know World of Sport, go and check it out. it's a little, it's not like a lot of people have been saying, because of NXT UK recently, they've had that cup competition, the Heritage Cup with those rules. I'm like, yeah, that's more like a video game version of World of Sport. But in true World of Sport rules, it was a lot slower. We had rounds. You'd hear the referee, a 1, a 2, a 3, very synonymous with that stuff. And yeah, we did have big characters, but it was more considered as a sport. You know, that's what it was presented as. It would go on alongside all these other sports on those afternoons. So that's how that was my first impressions of it. And then I remember being unwell one evening, and I think a Royal Rumble was on the TV. I couldn't sleep. And I think the first people I saw were like the Road Warriors, who just had this massive impression on me. They were just like over the top, that music coming down with the pads, the spikes, and then they get in there and wrestle. And I'm like, wow, this looks good. This is for me. And I sort of just fell in love with it from there, really. And I suppose growing up, you know, like most people, you're watching WCW, you're watching WWE, you're watching ECW, and then you start to want to venture across to other stuff like Japan. And the only way to do it back then was through tape traders. I mean, it wasn't something you could just click a button. I wish I had all this back then, because it would have been so much easier. But back then you'd have to wait. I'd have to wait for the tape to come in, hope that the tape works. Of course, it would never be in your language, so that was just part of the fun. And then you'd hear about these things. But, you know, I was talking the other day, Justin, on, I don't know, because obviously we haven't spoke too much, but like, and just to talk about our sort of growing up here, is that being a fan back then, I was talking about the magazines and how important they were. And I have to say, if I'm honest, to go down to a shop now and buy a magazine just does not appeal to me anymore, unfortunately. But back then, I had this shop very local to me. This guy, I don't know how he did it, but he'd have like 15 magazines, wrestling magazines, a month. And I would go through all of those. I'm talking, and I have a very unhealthy obsession of a collection in my garage right now, sitting there, of magazines, because I ended up going back as well and trying to collect as much as I can. And yeah, I was fascinated by the magazines, because you'd read articles and about other territories that I never knew about existed. And that just opened my world up even more. But I have to say, today, to think about going down and buying a magazine, I think unfortunately with the internet and everything else that's out there, it just doesn't have that same, it's not going to give you the same information that you don't already know. I mean, you'd be very hard pressed to find something out now in this day and age. But I've got to ask, because I mean, obviously you live across the pond. I'm sure you got a lot more than what we did, but was that a big thing for you as well, like growing up in your fandom?
The magazines?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Because I grew up in the middle of where I am right now, middle of northern Wisconsin.
Right.
And we didn't have cable. I got 3 channels. So that's how I grew up loving the AWA. That was the first thing I watched. And then obviously WWF came on. But NWA, everything I got from them was my friends at school that had cable or the magazines. And if you go back into my lockdown sessions, if you get bored someday, and I always say some of my lockdown sessions are a great cure for insomnia. One of the most nervous I have been to interview somebody was Nikita Koloff, because Nikita was a guy I read about in the magazines.
Right.
So, and you know, when you read it, I didn't get to see him, but those stories were kayfabe too. You know, like, oh, the Russians, they're planning this big, they're going to take out the Road Warriors. And now look they're bringing in this new guy, Vladimir Khrushchev, and he's going to be, and you're like, you're a kid. So you're like, oh shit, this is awesome. So yeah, and Nikita couldn't have been a nicer guy. That poor Nikita, and I say this all the time, but I think he enjoyed it, but poor Nikita, we went like an hour 20, and that's not talking like the time offline. And I was just like, man, I don't want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I was, dude, I had the nervous, like, beforehand, like, okay, Now, normally I would get nervous about like Al Snow when I interviewed Al, and he made me. I told him right away, I'm like, dude, I'm really nervous interviewing you, and I normally don't get nervous. And the reason why, if you've watched any of Al Snow's interviews, he's got more wrestling knowledge in this pinky than I think anybody has. So I'm like, dude, I don't want to say anything to inadvertently go, what are you talking about? You know, X, Y, and Z. And he couldn't have been nicer. But yeah, to answer your questions, we had the magazines. I'm currently
Look at that.
basing an article off of this PWI 500 from 2010. I'm doing like well, I don't want to say it too much what I'm doing, but I'm doing that. But I personally would love, we just had the Pro Wrestling Illustrated 50 top tag teams. I would love to go down to Walmart here and buy it, but it's just simply not available. There's nothing, and I don't even know if WWE still does a magazine. Do you know?
They do, but they have like, I mean, it's bad. It's not good, and they have a kids version now as well, which wasn't something you had back then. But yeah, I remember WWF. They had about 3 magazines at one time. They had a SmackDown magazine, a WWF one, and a Raw one. And Vince Russo, of course, that's where you first found out about him, because
Big Venom.
Yeah, most of his personality was in the magazine. I mean, he wasn't writing for like them to be transparent to what was going on TV. He was writing in like to us, to the fans that wanted a different opinion. Now, obviously, it would have to go through so many checks. I doubt you'd ever get a writer that's going to be able to put out stuff like that under WWE's umbrella anyway. But back then, that was like a massive deal as well. And that was like an internal magazine. You know, so this is what I'm saying, like all these other magazines, all these great writers that were out there, there was so much you could learn. And you know, a lot of writers were based in different areas. So you'd have a really good knowledge based on certain territories. And yeah, I just used to love all the ratings, like all the top 10s of tag teams, of heels, and comparing them to other magazines. And yeah, I used to be all on with that whole thing. And it was quite, I mean, it was quite political, I guess, looking back on it. I don't know how most of the talent would have felt, but for us fans, I think it was a great time. But obviously, like I say, unfortunately, I would love for the magazines to really flourish again, but I just don't know where you go with the narrative, because like, I'm sure you, like me, are just, I don't know, kayfabe is just soul destroying sometimes, that I kind of feel that magic has been lost, you know?
Well, what I used to do is, speaking of the ratings, when they had the AWA, the NWA, and WWF, I would go, even before I think we had three-way dances, I would look at, okay, the champions, who would win?
Right.
Okay, number ones, who would win? Or, whoa, this guy's over here now, because it was always so far behind. And a little side note, I would still love to collect magazines. The one I'm looking for is, I had it and I read it until I wore it out, was the March 1988 Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It had like a gold cover, and it was 1987 year in review. And I could just remember reading that. And it's like $20 now. And I'm like, man, I don't want to pay $20 for it. There's like a lot of things. Like I didn't really do a whole lot with like comic books. And now that I'm like, yeah, you know what? I would love to read some of these old comic books that I never read, but they're hundreds of dollars. And I'm like, I don't want to collect them. I just want to read them. There's pretty good stories. Other side notes. At some point in 1988, you know, they had the arena reports where you would go out and you'd send in the results. Right. Little Justin Clapper went to an AWA show in Crandon, Wisconsin, and my results are in that. I'll have to post that. I have that magazine bagged and boarded. And speaking of kayfabe, the one thing I remember about WWF magazine was right around 1988, I would say prior to, actually, I know it was prior to WrestleMania 4. One of the WWF magazines, my aunt would always get me a subscription for a couple years. So I would get these. And I remember reading, it was an article called Elizabeth at Home. And it starts off, this article goes, you know, Miss Elizabeth is the manager of World Wrestling Federation champion Randy Macho Man Savage. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, he was the Intercontinental Champion. He's not the heavyweight champion. And then, he wins the tournament at WrestleMania 4.
Oh,
but you know what? As a kid, you're kind of going, hang on. But okay. I tell you what, even when I went to training, my first day, you think you know it all until you get in that ring with a bunch of big dudes and you're going, all right, I hope this is fake. I hope this is not fake. I hate to use that word, but I hope that this is not going to hurt as much as I think it's going to. And it hurts.
yeah.
But you never quite knew. Now,
Yeah.
everybody watching this out there that's the internet smart, whatever. Oh, I knew this and I could do that. That's what I hate about the internet. That's why I would love for the magazines to come back, because even myself, sometimes I give a pretty smarmy review of stuff. We were talking about NXT TakeOver, but usually my stuff is, when I give kind of a bitchy review, I'm going, dude, I want it more old school. I want to believe. Don't throw the fake grenade in everybody. Like, no. When I was, the funny stuff that I used to see, and you probably used to see, was the babyface making fun of the heel. And that was what we saw.
Mm. Yeah, times have changed. That's for sure. I'm not so sure for the better, but times have definitely changed. So yeah, the magazines are a big thing. You know, you mentioned about your first wrestling training. When I first got started into wrestling, I started doing wrestling for these guys. I won't mention names, but I would do tours. I was about 16 at the time, and they took me to Wales, which isn't far from, well, it's kind of far at that time in England. It's like a 5-hour drive, and they pick you up, and you go and do like a tour for a week, 3 shows a day in these camps, in these holiday camps. And I was kind of like the guy, because I was like skinny rake back then. So I was the guy that would go under these masks and get the living daylights kicked out of me. And I'll never forget that belt shot, man. My God. And, you know, back then it was like, it was that whole thing about testing you to see if you'd stay around, and you had to pay your dues. And these guys were from more of the 90s. So they had that old mentality still with them. And I knew what they were doing, but they would do things like leave you in the middle of nowhere for hours, stranded, no phone, and you just walk in one direction and hope for the best that you'd come across somebody. Yeah, it was an interesting time to break into the business back then. But finally, I did earn the respect, thank God, and stuck around. But yeah, that's certainly made me realize that, yeah, wrestling might be kind of choreographed, but at the same time, there was like I think compared to now, and I say this with my media hat on, access to getting in, it was much more closed off. Even then, even back just 20 years ago, it was a very different thing. You had to be almost invited in, pay a lot of respect. Don't talk to this person, talk to that person. Whereas now, that whole thing has changed. You know, I say this all the time, but I was at a show last year, a local promotion, and I was in the back doing some media stuff in the locker room, and a couple of the wrestlers come up to me and they said, "Why aren't you wrestling? Where's your gear?" And I thought, my God, this is crazy. Like, what? And that's what I'm saying. Like, it back then, you knew who the stars were and you knew who weren't. And I think like that part of it has really changed a lot, you know, in just the 20 years, like in the UK scene anyway. That would never have happened. But yeah, that always makes me tickle sometimes. But yeah, got into it that way. Started to do some media stuff in the very early days as well. I used to do AOL, the infamous AOL dial-up stuff. You remember those chat rooms, the wrestling chat rooms and all that? I met some guys on there. They were doing newsletters, and I would be reporting at FWA shows at York Hall, which was probably at that time the biggest promotion in the UK. between about 2001 to about 2005. They had like a really good stint in the London area, and they had an academy, and I was very much involved with those guys. And then you obviously had your 1PW. I don't know if you are familiar with 1PW.
I am, because of Powered4 TV, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Who were they were a magazine company as well to begin with, and then they ended up obviously importing quite a lot of foreign guys in. I actually thought at the time it was a terrible idea because I just didn't see Rockstar Spud and Marty Skirtle and Doug Williams, Johnny Storm, Jody Flush. We didn't see them as much. And obviously we had like Raven coming in and Abyss and AJ Styles and Daniels, which was great. It always sold out down at Doncaster, trust me. But like it never really had long-term vision in it, unfortunately, like to build the next sort of crop of stars in the UK. Whereas now, obviously, there's like so many promotions out there. So in one way or another, I've always been in and around the business. Only in 2015 did I start a podcast, probably got on the end of the coattails of, you remember when podcasts were first coming along and they were like the in thing, like you had Jim Ross doing one, Steve Austin, and yeah, it was very cool at the beginning. I kind of got right to the end of that, and I thought, what can I do that's going to be different? I probably need to find a couple of guests. And I was really fortunate because I had good contacts with them. As I managed to get Diana Hart on for the first 2 episodes, and it was a massive help. And we was only supposed to be talking for 20 minutes, but we ended up talking for 2 hours per show, just about Davey and obviously Harry, and then her time in the WWF as well. And one thing as well about me is I was at the Wembley show in '92. As a very young fan, and obviously I was a huge Davey Boy fan back then. Then I went on to Brett as I got older, but back then I was a huge Davey Boy fan, and it was great to kind of have those conversations with them. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy, Sheldon Goldberg, the New England Championship Wrestling promoter.
I don't know him personally, but I know the name.
Yeah, he was like one of my regular guests as well. He was really knowledgeable. We used to talk about a lot of the old school wrestlers because, to be honest with you, that's all I really want to talk about sometimes. It's just the old school. We spoke so much about Bruiser Brody and that kind of connection they had with Stan Hansen in Japan, and just how the territory system worked and the ins and outs of it. It was... and WCCW was a big thing as well. We used to go through all those and do a lot of reviews. A lot of great characters that people probably don't even know about. But man, I mean, everyone thinks the WWF, of course, as it was back then, was like the out loudish characters. But man, you've got to go and look at WCCW, like Kamala. I mean, come on. They were doing that stuff long before. Even I was watching one the other day where it was like I think it was Jerry Jarrett was riding along in a car, and there was Dusty Rhodes on a horse, and one of them had a shotgun, trying to get him off the lawn. It was just, man, so ahead of their time. I think back then, but yeah. So I used to have a lot of guests coming on back then, and then obviously we branched out to doing sort of video stuff. So then I started to just go around to all these UK promotions and do media at all the shows. And only this year, I sort of ended up just creating my own company, and that was Powered4, which is kind of where we're at now. And that's the short end and short version of it, but that's where we're at, which obviously is a media / video on demand service. But I don't really like calling it a VOD too much, because I think a lot of video on demand services that I see and that I'm subscribed to, they kind of just, they're there, but they kind of just house them, as opposed, they don't give them much love. And with us, we kind of pull things out, and we'll do episodes and reviews and find the talent and promote internally for those guys. And we've always been about everybody. We don't just talk about the promotions on our service. We talk about other services and other promotions. Never have had any problems with that at all. Like, a lot of people find that odd, But I'm like, well, I'm kind of, I'm secure enough in my own mind that like Powered4 is good enough, and you know, I totally devote to that, and that's a great product. I don't really worry about advertising other video on demands if I like it. And I'm not kind of scared to sort of, you know, not mention them. I'm a huge Progress fan. I love TNT as well, which is thankfully that's on Powered4, which is a very good promotion. I like Rev Pro. ICW up in Scotland is very good as well. So we were kind of fortunate in the UK. I would say between about 2010 to about 2019 at least, where we had all these promotions popping out of nowhere. And I think there's good and bad that's come along with that, but for the most part, it's the industry was very much thriving, and that's including the NXT UK brand that came over, that everyone was really concerned about and saying they're going to kill the UK scene and they're doing this deliberately. And then World of Sport came along as well, and they were doing like a revamped version on ITV. Wasn't my cup of tea, I have to say. It was more of like a Gladiators TV show type of feel to it. You know, it was a bit, wasn't like paying fans. It was more of an audience that kind of went in and watched it. So it was a bit different, but yeah, it's been thriving. So it's really allowed us and myself to really dive in, make the product we've got here with Powered4, get some tremendous content on. Got to thank you as well, obviously, for our overseas Chicagoland Championship Wrestling. I have to be honest with you, this is just with my fan hat on. That show, I was absolutely buzzing about it. I couldn't get enough of it. Honestly, couldn't get enough of it. I loved the way it was done. I loved the studio wrestling concept anyway. And I always used to say this to a lot of wrestling schools in the UK. I used to say that, you know, you should really try and design, if you're going to do events, make it studio wrestling, because you have that interviewer out there all the time. A lot of the guys today, they're a little bit nervous about interviews. Then they don't know their character maybe as well as they should do. It's a great opportunity to do it at a school. They're not, you know, people that go to those events, they're not expecting Ric Flair. But it's a time to get your stuff out there, to kind of have that audience in front of you, get in front of the mic. And that's the only way you really find your character, and you add bits and critique bits week to week. But yeah, I really liked the Chicagoland Championship Wrestling. That was a great fix. And of course, Ignite as well.
Yeah, and they're doing a lot. That's the thing. Like, I got introduced to, and I'm the same way with Wrestling Travel. When I came on board, obviously Wrestling Travel, we're bringing fans from around the world to your favorite wrestling events, WrestleMania, Wrestle Kingdom. Well, now the world's changed. Mm-hmm. Hopefully just briefly, and we can get back to getting fans to, in fact, I know everything's going to be okay. But in this meantime, like, what do? We had a YouTube channel just sitting there. And I'm like, well, I'm going to bring guests on, and maybe I can help the boys and girls sell a t-shirt or sell a ticket when this ridiculous pandemic is done. And plus, I love talking wrestling. So that's how I started with the kind of using this media. And I've used the same thing that you have. I want to work with everybody. I know that we have fans and people probably in our own company that only know WWE, only know AEW. And I say, I want Wrestling Travel to work with the top, being the promotions on TV, and the beginning. I never say the bottom. The beginning, when you're starting to do independent wrestling, because and a lot of the best lockdowns that I've had are with the guys and girls that people are like, I'm not sure who that is, but they got a really cool story. And you've touched on so much. Yeah, back in the day, to break into wrestling, there was no, I'll look up wrestling school on the internet, or I'll just call somebody, or I'll start my own backyard promotion, which I don't want to knock backyard wrestling too much, because I've interviewed a lot of these independent guys that started off backyard and realized, I love this, I want to do this, I need to get trained professionally. Like, I don't know how it is over there in the UK, but in my home state of Wisconsin right now, I can buy a ring tomorrow and run a show with no licensing, no nothing. I could call myself a wrestling promoter. I could call myself and my 6 neighbors wrestlers, and I can go charge money.
No,
That's yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I know you've touched on that point a few times as well, and it's the same over here. It's the same thing. That's why I say, although the industry was thriving, don't get me wrong. I turned up at a show once. They didn't even have a ring. They had bloody broomsticks as turnbuckles. I mean, it was bad. There was a paying audience there, local, but my God. And I think they worked. I think there were 3 wrestlers just working under masks for about 4 matches. I mean, it was just like I couldn't believe what I was watching, and that was only like 2 years ago. So, you know, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, nowadays you don't even need to have a ring, and yeah, you have to be careful. I mean, the thing is as well, the fans have changed as well. The way we consume wrestling has changed, and that's a big thing as well. Like I talk to a lot of promoters, and obviously I'm sitting out there doing media, so often I'll go and sit with a crowd because I want to see like what their feeling are about it, what they're talking about with their friends, what the product is. Because like I don't know if it's the same in the US, but when WWE comes to the UK, okay, this is the familiar formula. What happens to a wrestling fan's experience through that night that I have observed time and time again. Much, especially in the last 10, 15 years, is that they only come here twice pre-COVID, so we don't get to see them. So they're always sold out. They go to the O2 London, and you get there. Obviously, the day before, you're excited. Everyone's excited. They get to the building. They're doing the woos. They're happy. They're loud. They're buying freaking merchandise, more money than what's online. But they're all happy. If they've got kids there, it's even better. But the adult fan, that demographic of adult fan, they go there, they get excited, they go and have maybe dinner before the show, and then they take their seat. They get really pumped and excited. They might get a dark match, ramped up for that. And then if it's a Raw or SmackDown, especially like if they're taping, man, for me, I sit there now and like they go live and you get that first big buzz, and then you get to about 20% through the night and it starts. You hear everybody's become a booker. What's he doing that for? Oh, he shouldn't do it like that. They become like analysts. And I'm like, I've never sat in a crowd as much as I do at wrestling, where everybody's so super excited and then so negative about 20% through the show. It's unbelievable. But then I say to myself, is that their fault, or is it more of a case of the way WWE has educated their fans in the way to think about their own product? Because internally, WWE, they showed us programs like Total Divas, okay, that's going to basically tell you how they work their matches out sometimes. And they're kind of saying to you, no, that's Daniel Bryan you see on the screen is Daniel Bryan, but this is Bryan Danielson. This is the real Bryan Danielson, because he's off screen and he's going to talk about his problems. And that's what I'm talking about. It's very hard to sit and watch 3 hours of Raw, really be invested, when they're just going to tell you, like, I don't know, a day later on Total Divas, oh, this is how we worked it all out, and for me, I think that's where those fans are sitting there. And I think they've got that headspace on, almost like when they're watching the product in front of them. And yeah, I think that's become a very typical thing. I don't know if that's the same experience that you've had, but it's certainly, when I go to shows now, especially WWE ones, that formula seems to be more and more common.
Yeah, one of the things that I've said is, do you remember when it was the late 80s, early 90s, and they would say, hey, you're getting the Hart Foundation versus Strike Force?
Right.
You were just like, okay, cool, man, that's awesome. Like, I didn't complain because there was no, well, I'd rather see this and that. The one of the first times I was ever really kind of disappointed in the WWF at the time was, I think it was the Hart Foundation and Danny Davis versus Strike Force and Tito Santana at WrestleMania. And I was like, this is great, but why are the tag team titles not on the line at this major event.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, everybody's a backstage booker. I agree.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's getting to the stage now where I'm expecting a promoter somewhere to go, you know what, our VIP ticket, you can come in, you can come back to the locker room, and why not just, we'll give you a bottle of water and you can just watch the two guys work the match out. You know, you can watch that and then you can go and sit down. Or better not, why not just customize it? You know, we'll let you customize your own match for a set price, you know. I don't know how
Cyber
far it's
Sunday,
gonna
yeah.
get. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I do get, and I don't. What I want to try to avoid in my life is, and I'm sure you do too, is not to become that jaded,
Mm,
cynical wrestling fan, because we can go back and talk about the old school. One of the things I've talked about, and I'm going to plug right now, a great podcast done by Tyson Dukes, good friend, Tyson Moody. He is giving away free knowledge right now on YouTube, wrestling holds, reversals, just little things that I call kind of like filling in the cracks, which is just refreshing because he's an old school wrestler. He breaks down some matches. I think it's the Hammerlock podcast. So if you're looking for something a
right,
little
nice.
more on the realism, I always say check him out. But one of the things I've had conversations with people about, and I want to get into with you because of our love for old school wrestling, is the lost things in wrestling, the lost moves. I always say the atomic drop, and I used to say I picture the atomic drop, and remember when Honky Tonk Man used to take that, and then people said no, Rick Rude took that the best. You know, the art of selling and stuff like
Mm,
that. But there's so many moves today, or from yesteryear. I sound like an old time radio broadcast, that are not used today, that I think somebody could almost do an entire character of somebody using old school moves. I remember Mick Foley when he was in ECW. When he turned heel, he decided not to be hardcore, and he would use like a headlock rest move and all that stuff. And he said the fans were absolutely livid. But you recently mentioned on our podcast about, you know, 1950s black and white wrestling and going back into that and how enjoyable that is. And I know with most of our core audience of people, they were probably like, yeah, but I was like, dude, you're my guy. Because going back and that actually, Tyson is doing like the 12 days of Thesmus with the best of Lou Thez on his channels and stuff like that. So you would enjoy that too. But it's very cool for me to talk to you, guy that's like me, that goes, hey, I like what I'm seeing. You know, watching it now, I still watch it. Going back to when I was a kid, obviously we're nostalgic. We're going to go back to that, but to go back even further, when you talk WCCW on the network, they have from like 1981, and I went back and started watching. Dude, that can hang today. So entertaining. And you talk about the characters. You talk about liking Bruiser Brody. Did you know? Here's my trivia question today. I'm a big AWA guy. Bruiser Brody in the AWA was never known as Bruiser Brody. He was King Kong Brody.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason was we had Dick the Bruiser. So they didn't want to cross promote. And then having King Kong Bundy, look in the WCCW, it was Boom Boom Bundy. And I forget what else. They called them something different in AWA, but it's so cool to do the history of wrestling. I think we should do a history of wrestling type
Yeah, man, I'd
podcast.
be up for that. I'd be up for that. Yeah, I love the AWA as well. I mean, the AWA, I mainly got into that. I mean, I think I got to a point around maybe 2008, maybe somewhere around that, where I was just not really into the current stuff, and I was like, I need to see if I can get some of this old, this old footage, and I just fell in love with it. Like the first one I went back on, and fortunately for me, because I was friends with Diana, she had like some access to the Stampede stuff. Now, Stampede Wrestling is like, for me, was when people talk about that fast pace, they were doing that way before a lot of other promotions, and they were also importing quite a lot of UK guys as well, that I didn't realize at that time. And you know, when you watch Brett and Dynamite back then, and man, they were they were crazy. They were like 40-minute matches non-stop. You just think, wow. And Memphis as well. Memphis is another big favorite. I mean, Bill Dundee, just legendary to me. Obviously, Jerry Lawler, but like just the way they laid out those cards and those matches, really, really amazing. Obviously, I was, to be honest with you, I'd be very hard pressed to find territory wrestling that I don't enjoy. You know, and you see them at a different territory, you're thinking, oh, okay, they're a completely different character almost. They're not playing the same thing. They could, but they almost like the promoter's gone, no, I need this out of you. Or I need the Freebirds for my guys, you know, the Von Erichs. You know, you guys are going to come in, but my boys, they're the ones. And they were like rock stars. I mean, I think people don't realize how popular the Von Erichs were, like the brothers, and you know, girls, and I mean, they were like rock stars back then, right? I mean, they were just, and I think I don't know if I'm wrong in saying this, but were they one of the first guys to have that music entrance as well at one time? I'm not sure, but I'm sure I read it somewhere where they might have been one of the first group or guys to have that music entrance, which again, when you think about wrestling, you think music's always been there, but it wasn't for such a long time.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard is that Sergeant Slaughter said play the Marine Corps.
Right.
So it's always debatable, and I think a lot of people, you know, I think even Michael Hayes will say that they were the first one to have music. But yeah. Von Erichs, man, you watch any of the world class stuff and just hear the ladies screaming, and the, you know, they were legitimately the women want us, guys want to be us type thing, because you were you know, and that
sorry to cut you up, but that was 24/7. Like if they left the arena, like for the week they go out, they're getting cheered. You know, they're staying in character for the most part, and that's what I loved about it. That's what I missed today, the fact of that commitment, that dedication that they had, and even the heels as well. Very, very careful back then where they went, who they were seen with. You know, so different today. Obviously, one of my biggest issues is when I watch a match and then, I don't know, they post a selfie after, and or tweet each other and say thanks for the match. I'm like, just do that personal. Just text each other. Don't put it on Twitter. Yeah, those things grind me. But back then, like you say, they were rock stars, but they were living it 24/7, man. I mean, they were those characters.
You know, one of the things I've heard too is like when they tweet when somebody gets hurt in a match and they're like, hey, I'm really sorry about that. Yeah. No, tweet, hey, I'm glad I broke your leg. You know, text them behind the scenes and go, hey, I'm sorry, you know, check in on the guy. Well, use it. You know, you gotta use it. I forgot where I was going, but with the territory stuff, you know, Von Erichs and Freebirds, do yourself a favor if you're watching this. Go look some of those matches up, and not only the matches, but the interviews and the segments they used to do. Where do you remember one of the Von Erichs was in a feud with gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, and he won the services of his valet Sunshine for 30 days, and they would go and watch. You know, and he's being a dick to her, like, wash the car, oh, you missed the spot, this and that. And it was just, some of that stuff is great. Now, when I look at it back then, maybe you were kind of like, oh, okay, this is kind of silly. But looking at it now through the eyes that we have through the current product, I'm like, it's awesome. I remember watching pro wrestling in my house as a kid. And I get this will have a point to today's wrestling. Sometimes I'm watching today's wrestling and it's no longer a booker, but it's a television writer. And remember a couple of years ago, Roman Reigns would be out doing a promo, and you read behind the scenes that they have to do it word for word or they're going to get their ass chewed out backstage. So the crowd could be booing or cheering or silent, and he has to stick within this script. People would come over knowing that I was a wrestler and into wrestling and want to watch it with me. And I always was like, I don't want to watch this with anybody because it's embarrassing sometimes. Because people are like, what are you watching? When I was a kid, going back to that, my stepdad came in when I was watching wrestling. And of course he comes in with one of the Terry Taylor, who I love and respect, but he was the Red Rooster with the spiked comb, and he's and he's looking at me like, are you a freaking moron? And I'm like, I guess so, but you know, I can't defend stuff like that, and it's hard to defend some stuff that goes on now. So that's where my thing. A question about World of Sport now, because I don't know, and I don't know the answers. So that's why I'm asking. When World of Sport was on, that was a kind of a weekly program over in the UK, but in its heyday, were they running like quote unquote house shows where fans, you know, is that where they were getting the footage from running these house shows, or was it just like a weekly program, or how did that work?
You know? It was a weekly program, but I believe they did some tours like every so often. So they'd maybe do a circuit around the UK, but for the most part, it was made for TV. It was made for ITV, who on a Sundays or whatever, it would be like you'd have a lot of sport on. So you'd maybe have, I don't know, like they'd show horse racing or football, soccer, cricket, and wrestling would just be shoved in there. But it was like, it was very, very popular. I think that, you know, it was part of the entertainment of a weekend. I mean, it was just there. Nobody really saw it as like, that's wrestling. It was just, that was your wrestling. That's what you watched. And we didn't really have much access to what was going on and what on earth was going on across the pond. We just did not see any of that on our screen. So all we knew was this world of sport and these giant characters that they used to bring in, and that used to add to the drama. But that was it. So yeah, in terms of how they used to shoot it, that was kind of it. It's just a shame how it all come to an end. I mean, for the most part, they brought in a new guy. I forget his name, but he was taking over the sports side of it, and he just didn't see where wrestling could fit in going forward. I think at that point, this is a time when Vince just came in, and Vince was going a completely different direction. And I think they thought like, we're not gonna, we can't go with that, you know. But yeah, I mean, because of ITV and it's such a big channel over here, they had that backing for so long. So that's why they maintained it. It wasn't like they ever had to have a contract renewal with a TV company, because they basically own them, which was a massive, massive thing to have. But yeah, it kind of faded out quite quickly as well. That was the downside to it.
I'm such a terrible host right now, only because I've got like a million things in my head, because you and I are on the same wavelength. So you'll have to pardon me as I talk a little bit more.
That's okay, buddy. I'm the same.
One of the things I wanted to tell you, you being a fan of the British Bulldogs, is, and we're talking about the AWA, is get yourself on YouTube if you haven't already seen this. In 1989, in the AWA. And I think the AWA aired it, but I think the true story, it was just kind of a coming together. But did you know in 1989, the British Bulldogs faced the Rock and Roll Express under the AWA heading? So to me, that's like,
I did not know that. Yeah, that's.
And I remember that happening at the time. But to me, going back now, there's so many of those. Like, that's a dream match. That would be like if the original Midnight Express fought the Hart Foundation and we didn't know it. But that's a hidden gem, and that's on YouTube over here.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can get it over there. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, we touched on the podcast. Now, you were saying that some of the World of Sport wrestling footage is gone forever because of they used to just wipe the tapes, use them for next week. Is that's so? How much of it do we even have we done a deep dive and figured out how much is actually left? And
I don't think we'll ever completely know, but from my inquiries is that they definitely went over a lot of the footage. Unfortunately, back then they just didn't have the foresight that maybe people would want to go back and watch this stuff, or there would be something like a WWE network comes along, or like Powered. And I guess, you know, they just didn't see that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of live stuff back then was basically, if it wasn't live, it wasn't no good. You know, nobody's going to watch it. And that's how it was considered. So that's the unfortunate thing. A lot has been lost. There is definitely enough out there, but to be honest with you, whenever they've done documentaries about it, I tend to see a lot of the same footage coming up over and over again, which makes me think that maybe they don't have an awful lot as much as what we probably think they have, which is kind of crazy considering how long it ran for. But yeah, that's one of those, man, if only, you know.
Yeah, that's one of the things, like I said, I can't remember if I said the on the air, off the air, but growing up with only 3 channels, on Sunday afternoons, I could watch figure skating or whatever else, golf, or I could turn to my local PBS station and watch a program called Doctor Who. This is before they brought it back in 2005. Now, I know that program, throughout my reading about it, had the same thing. They wiped a lot of the tapes, but they found a lot of the tapes, or a lot of the times fans would actually set up their video camera, whatever they had at the time, a projector, and record it off TV. We need to, and I'd love to spearhead this, because the worst thing that could happen is we don't find anything, but we need to find out if people have some hidden footage or anything, or even if they took it by their own, whatever they had at the time, video camera, not video camera, but, you know, home movie, 8mm. If somebody has any clips of old wrestling and can contact, you know, yourself at Powered4 TV or us at Wrestling Travel, hit us up on Twitter. And, you know, if we have the technology to make a copy of it and stuff, and just preserve history, really. I mean, it's selfish of me, I'll admit it, because I want to see it, first of all, but I think it's selfish on the behalf of the wrestling fan, especially the UK wrestling fan, like the truly British wrestling is fantastic. And I know a lot of the British wrestling fans are very proud, and they should be, because I love the British style of wrestling. But let's get some of this. Maybe we can get, even if we got a match back or a 10-second clip that nobody's ever seen, that's been hidden away. You got to contact us, folks, because I, you know, and I'm there's no reason for me to not just dream big. And I dream big and go, maybe we can get this, and Powered4 TV can get it on. And I tell you what, I want to talk about Powered4 TV, because you guys have been great to us. And of course,
you've been good to us, buddy.
Today's December 7th, and I believe it's the young Rich's birthday. I read on Facebook.
It is.
So shout out to him. Happy belated birthday, because you won't see this on the day, Rich. But I was so happy to get involved. You guys have been good to us. We've got some free matches that were just classics, and just, you know, a lot of great British wrestlers. But now one of the latest ones you guys sent over was Road Warrior Hawk wrestling in a match and stuff like that. So this service that you have is huge. And I was lucky enough to, and I think I started talking about this to you about a half hour ago before we went, but to bring you, just put you in touch with Chicagoland Wrestling and Ignite Wrestling in Florida. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, Justin Clapper, JC, man, you did all kinds of work getting Chicagoland. And no, what I've done is taken John Bullard, who runs a great promotion, and I've done what I've always done in wrestling, and what I always want to do in wrestling. Take somebody I know here and somebody I know here. They don't know each other. Put them in touch, and then what have I done? My work is easy. I've just introduced 2 friends to each other, and you guys have done all the work. The same with a lot of indie professionals. And the reason why I really got into Chicagoland Wrestling is because of a good friend who's a wrestler over here, Garrison Creed, who, when you see the guy, this guy did not take a day off during COVID. He's been working out. He actually I don't know how the independent wrestling scene is over there, even before the COVID, but this guy looks like a professional wrestler because he's jacked up, ex-military. He makes me want to buy his merch versus sometimes you go to a show and there's some skinny 120-pound kid who's got the tap-out gear on, and it's like, maybe wrestles once a month. But this guy wrestled for Chicagoland. That's how I got in touch with John. I'm going, man, I know these guys over in the UK, but perhaps, it's all about just getting eyes on the product. And man, he does a great job, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
I know we touched on it.
He's got a great story as well, like a great history himself, and you can tell that's his. What we see is very much the perception he wants to give off. Like he's almost got it down to the T. You can tell he's quite proud and happy. Because the thing is, when you start off a promotion sometimes, or anything really, those first couple of times, maybe they're not how you envisioned it. He's had this great envision of what it's going to be like. But I think when I look at Chicagoland Championship Wrestling, he sent that tape to us the first time. I was like, oh, this is different. This is like it's almost like an old school kind of concept, but with a modern day, like it's shot very cinematic all the way through. There's like a camera that's just roaming around. It doesn't stop. It doesn't cut. You see a lot of wrestling today, it cuts and they go to another corner. And sometimes it takes you out the moment. This is just very much like being there, just roaming around slowly. And it's it's almost, not sound too ridiculous, but it's very beautifully shot. It's like a movie, and it's it's an art to it. Pulls focus, pulls out of focus, and I loved all the promos, all the guys there. To me, I didn't know any of those wrestlers. I'll be totally honest with you, other than Garrison actually, but everyone else I did not know. So for me to watch that show and not know anybody, and to get the idea, to get like who these guys are, that just goes to show the strength of what they were putting across. Like each and every one of those guys knew who they were. Like they sold it to me easily. And the matches, I said this to the other John Scott that I did the review with, it felt like to me the fans weren't going there, and it's very uncommon to see this, but fans weren't sitting there going, I want a 5-star match, I want it to go long. They looked like they were sitting there just passionately rooting for the favorite, and that was it. No matter how they win, I want my guy to win. And I think that's how it should be. That's how it probably was. I don't care if they get a roll up. I don't care if it's a quick match. I don't care if it's not 5 stars or if it's not 15, 20 minutes. Just get in there, beat the heck out of this guy. We want to see you win. And that's what really shone through on the screen to me. That was the big difference when I was watching it.
That, and I wanted to talk about Kim's promotion, Ignite Wrestling.
Sure.
I've gotten them. Their venue is I think it's a brewery.
Yeah.
They do a really nice job. We got to watch their product, and that was somebody that's happy. So one of my PSA right now is there's a lot of promotions that do a lot of great work, that have a lot of really good production that maybe specifically the fans in the United Kingdom maybe haven't seen. If you are a promoter or running a promotion or know of a promotion that you keep an eye on, and you get a hold of Powered4 TV, get a hold of us at Wrestling Travel. We could put 2 and 2 together, because I know you guys got the start of a nice little empire here where people can get out. And sometimes it's not even about, if I had a promotion, I would throw it on and not even, like I do my lockdown sessions and get them on Powered4 TV on your free part, because, hey, I want people to obviously I need more views on some of the stuff. Some of the craziest things I've seen is, I've got some great stars on there and they don't have a whole lot of views. Then I got some indie guys that promote it very well, and now we got eyeballs on there, and it's just all about, here's what I'm doing. I'm not going to go real deep and say this is my art form, this lockdown session, because obviously this is very rough. But you should see the first one. Go back to the first one I did with Alicia Atut, John, and I can't even watch it because I'm going, yeah, and I'm like, dude, I hate that guy already, and it's me. But I love getting this art form out there. I love getting the interviews out there because I feel like in some very small way, I can use wrestling travel, the following stuff that we have, the following that Powered4 TV has, and start to bring some of these guys that are worth it. Now, the funny thing is, I got some interviews that are on the cutting room floor that will probably never air because, yes, even yours truly has gotten fooled by people that are most likely not a trained wrestler, but were referred to me. And when I ask you who broke you in the business, who was your trainer, and you can't answer that,
Oh, there.
that's tough. And then I've got some of the guys that were actually legitimately trained on some great promotions and want to be on the show. Great. Ask them some questions, and I get the one-word answer. And I'm like, brother, I can't air it
Yeah,
because
it's tough. I mean, I'm exactly the same from our. You know, like you said earlier, anyone can buy a ring, anybody can just start a promotion. So, you know, although we're just a streaming service and we do media as well, I kind of feel I have a responsibility to not only the wrestlers, the fans, the fans that subscribe to us, but is also I have to do some digging around and a little bit of research. Now, I'm not always in the best possible place to be able to do that. I might my knowledge on that particular product might be kind of weak, so that can be difficult. But I have eyes and ears in other places that nobody will ever know who they are, because if they did, I wouldn't have them. But these people are very influential in the business. They're very experienced. They're my go-to guys, and they do a very good job at doing due diligence on just anybody. So if I have a name come to me, I have a promotion just starting and they want to do the background checks of business and have they got any leftover stuff, you know, they've got bad history here. And everybody's got a past, don't get me wrong. You can come to me, you might have done, you know, failed in one aspect of it, but want to give it another go. I'm not going to turn you away, but we have to also be responsible for some of these, you know, it's no good just somebody coming to us and saying, well, we're going to do this, going to do that. And, you know, just firing out ideas. Sometimes you have to be very realistic and you have to be brutally honest with people as well. A lot of the times you know, you're managing expectation as well. You know, we have a few people that have come with us and wanted to come with us and been like, well, I want to do pay-per-views. I want to sell it for XYZ. And you have to be, you know, it's difficult because they're very passionate about their product as I am about mine. So you have to think how that person's going to feel when you say to them, mate, that might not be the case. You know, we might have to slow down, take a couple of steps back, and we'll give you the process of the way forward. You know, and sometimes that can hit people quite hard. Some other people not so much. They want to learn, they want to grow with you. And I think that's probably the best wording I'd say about us is that we just want to grow with our promotions. You know, we've got promotions on Powered4 that are in, and as your words, I like them a lot, is where they're beginning, you know, and they are at the beginning. They might not have been promotions necessarily catered for TV, and they might just be live promotions more than anything. They might not have even had cameras there until we came along. But it's about, you know, even for those local fans to sort of come back and watch it on Powered4, but get a different experience to the one where they've been there. Now, that might come in the form of maybe a few added interviews. Maybe there was a match that they didn't see before that. And you get a different experience. One thing I'll say that's really fascinating, and this goes a bit off subject here, but I was thinking about this only the other day, and when I spoke earlier to you about the whole WWE fan experience, is you know, you go to any live event, right? You sit there, and the one big thing, huge difference to not watching it on telly for me, is you don't hear the play-by-play. and sometimes there's a real emptiness inside, and it's like, I don't know, you're looking out and thinking, where is that? I need something. And I was kind of thinking that about Powered4. I thought, because a lot of I know Rich is very much on about us sometimes having commentators over everything, but then there's also a nice quality not to have commentators sometimes, and just having the experience as if you were just sitting there. But you need to kind of shoot it in a way that kind of mirrors that same experience. It's no good just having a dead cam set up, you know, that's kind of bare. But I think there is something to having both experiences sometimes, maybe through the screen. It's something I want to look into. But I was going to ask, is that something like when you go to a show, do you ever get that pull of where is that guy I'm supposed to be listening to? I mean, it doesn't happen maybe to me with indie shows, but if I'm at like a WWE show or something, or Impact show, I'm thinking, I want to hear somebody. I want to know what they're talking about, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Especially when I went to shows where they had the anonymous Raw general
Oh
manager,
God.
and it just dings, and you're like, man, there's a lot of stuff. But is there I have a DVD set that and granted, both of these names will rub some people the wrong way, but it has the original commentary on these classic matches, and then you can hit the secondary audio, and it's Jim Cornette and Dave Meltzer talking about just the history of these guys and these matches and the territories and stuff, and it's sort of cool. Is that something that's technologically, can you do like a couple audio tracks?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of watch-alongs as well with the actual wrestlers that were involved in the matches.
Oh, awesome.
So you can, there's a couple of our guys that have been doing. I mean, one of the ones that we're trying, one of our ambassadors, Paul Robinson, who's, you know, he only lives like literally not that far from me. He's got a big thing to us, and he's very good at kind of giving us that. But the problem is Paul is very old school as well. So he doesn't like talking about it too much. To a degree, you know, he'll only go so far. So it's like, you know, I'm a bit like that as well. If I have a wrestler on, I don't push them too hard to want to know all the insights, to be quite honest with you. So I have to be a bit respectful. But yeah, that's definitely something that we've been doing with guys that want to do that and open up. And, you know, I'm not really that bothered about, I mean, it's just purely as a fan, but hearing about every last little hook and crook to what was supposed to happen, what didn't. I like the idea of them telling me the story, even if it's just from their character, about what's going on, and you know, how it felt, and the fan reactions, etc. You know, you can get a lot from that.
Now, next time, if Paul Robinson actually lives that close to you, next time you see him, you just tell him I'm very disappointed in him. He didn't necessarily turn me down for a lockdown session. He just never replied. So
that's not unheard of.
And I got to see him in Toronto last summer.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
With the progress and everything. So a tremendous wrestler and stuff. So glad to know it's not just me.
No, he's very old school as well. He'll only talk to me on a phone. He doesn't like texting or anything like that. So
wow,
it's got to be straight up.
Now, the other thing that obviously you have to do your due diligence on a lot of things. I'm assuming that wrestling match where the four corners were broomsticks is not something that's going to appear on Powered4 TV. So I think that's kind of time when you have to be brutally honest. The next subject I kind of want to talk about with you kind of started over in the UK, and it's something I'm very passionate about. I talked about this. You probably, if you watched anything I've done on this subject, you could probably repeat word for word what I'm going to say. Wrestling used to come from, had this motto, protect the business. And what we were doing is we were protecting basically kayfabe, what we were doing from the general public. Now that's obviously been gone since Vince decided he no longer wanted to pay taxes and said, hey, it's a predetermined sport. I'm bringing it back because I do believe, and I started this on our True Heel Heat podcast they had me on because it was right in the middle when it first started with the speaking out movement. I think that we, you, myself, any fan watching this, anybody in pro wrestling, has a responsibility to protect the business and respect the business. Based on the fact of what I said, I could get a ring tomorrow. I could be a dirtbag. I get a ring tomorrow. I could run over here, and now I could put the title on myself. And instead of paying $5,000, which some of us paid for our training, I could say, "Hey, kid, for $300, I'll train you. I'm going to act like a complete douchebag, but I got the belt." So some young kid's going to think, well, that must be the way you have to act, like a complete D-bag. And that's where I'm like, we need to protect the business from people like that. Because think about this, and it's not just, pardon my rant here for a minute, John. I saw the ladies that came forward, first of all, for the speaking out movement. And it's a big step. I mean, that's huge to come out. But I also saw the other side of this. Then people started complaining, well, I worked for this promoter and he booked me to lose 3 times in a row. Dude, you are taking something that is absolutely stupid and comparing it to some woman courageously stepping out. But, as you start to think about it, and they got into the bullying, how many great potential wrestlers has the sport lost because somebody just said, man, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm getting kind of bullied around. I mean, we've lost a lot of potential great wrestlers just to the fact that, hey, I can't make it on a hot dog and a handshake. I'm going to have to get a real job, and eventually you lose it. But the speaking out movement is tough, and it's got to be tough on you guys running where you've got all this footage, and now did that have a big toll on? Do you have to go out and edit out stuff? And I mean, how do you treat that? Because this day and age of everybody's a keyboard person, I'm always afraid of when I ask somebody for a lockdown, I'm like, I got to do a big history dive here. Am I interviewing somebody that's a total creep?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when that was all going on, I had those same thoughts, as you can imagine. I'm thinking, blimey, we got this huge, gigantic library just sitting there. And I certainly don't want to be, highlighting these people with posters and covers and all the rest of it. But what that came down to was basically us just talking to each promoter individually, because again, it is their content. I can't purposely go in there and just chuck out stuff just because I think that. So I have to go to them first, because ultimately it's their product, it's their show. So, we dealt with that on an individual basis. I certainly wasn't interested or, had no desire on highlighting anybody that was involved in that. So we had to change covers and things like that. It's a tough one in some cases, because, you look at WWE, for instance, with the network, and say Chris Benoit, and how they deal with that. Now, obviously, if you go back to WrestleMania 20, you can watch that main event, but they certainly don't make any light of it, which I think is, probably the correct thing to do in those cases. But I think to be honest with you, I think it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I don't think you can just blanket everything the same way. I think we have to treat things individually. You have to look at them as delicate as possible, because ultimately, like you, I don't want the real true brave people that have come forward, the victims. Ultimately, that's where I want the focus is more on them than these guys and girls or whatever. I want to focus more on those people. I want to see what we can do to help them now and also for the future. I think one of my biggest concerns, I have to say, is, and I tend to steer away from it a little bit now, is wrestling schools, because we did have a few wrestling schools with us, but to be honest with you, when I dived into it a little bit more, I was a little bit concerned when I saw how certain things were running. There were classic cases. I don't know, again, I work in the health and social care background. That's my bread and butter, and I do a lot of stuff with safeguarding. So I have a really good insight into that world. But small things, like I would see, obviously, wrestling schools where there were children and adults, but they would do the sessions together, And then I'm thinking, like, do they have DBSs? Do they have the checks? And it was a bit of a free for all, if I'm honest, you know, like, and like you say, the teacher, he just wants the money. Most times he wants to know his school's going to be running. And it's not always been the best managed. And I think that as much as I say that the industry has grown rapidly, the consequence of that has been that we've overlooked and we've not been, you know, insightful enough almost as a collective to look at those little cracks maybe that, you know, ultimately were there. I mean, I've heard a lot of things of manipulation and, you know, especially to the trainers and stuff like that. And that sort of stuff does concern me. You know, I don't want to be showcasing any of that type of stuff. And yeah, it's I think it's going to take a while, you know, purely to get over that. But a lot of the companies like DNA Pro Wrestling, who I work at as a producer for, like the promoter there, Dave Hunter, he is who also just recently they've just made a collaboration with so it rubs off on everyone there, Justin, because they've just done a collaboration with Chicagoland Championship Wrestling and they're global, so they're involved with that now. But those guys at DNA, they've literally gone to huge lengths to make sure that the safeguarding stuff has been put in place properly. Like they've got all their staff going on training for safeguarding. They're all going to be DBS checked. Not just that though, because, you know, this is what I say about people, and everyone harps on, well, if they're DBS checked, it'll be fine. No, it won't be fine. That's all well and dandy, and it looks great on a bit of paper. But trust me, I've got an enhanced DBS myself. However, if I went out tomorrow and did something bad, guess what? This bit of paper don't mean nothing anymore. So you have to make sure if anybody that's watching this now, because I do get a lot of questions about DBS, the check, well, the one you want has to be the one that's on the system and it's updated on the system. It's not a certificate. It's something that they will come in 6 times a year and randomly do the check without you knowing. That's the one you want if you really want to keep a good eye on, especially people that are teaching, you know, vulnerable people or children. Those are the ones you really need, are the updated version of the DBS, the one that runs on the system, not just being presented with a certificate. Because like I say, I could go out tomorrow, vandalize something, I don't know, criminal activity, and nobody else would be none the wiser. So it makes no difference at all. You know, that's great to have a bit of paper. And I know there's a lot of promotions out there that say, well, we've partnered with this and we've partnered with that, which is fantastic. But ultimately, you know, it has to come when the shows are back on, and it has to be properly managed. I know a lot of them have taken on a lot of safeguarding officers. Maybe somebody from the outside is probably, I would say, probably the best idea, because then they've got they don't know wrestling. They got no politics or agenda to anything. And I think that's probably the best advice. Yes, it's going to cost money. I mean, ultimately, that's why people are going to be turned off by it, because again, this is all money. I know a lot of promotions that run shows and they don't even have like your paramedics there on site and stuff like that. And again, it all boils down to money. You know, they're happy to bring in the big wrestlers, but they don't think of things like, well, if someone gets injured out there, or maybe even a fan is feeling unwell, have I got somebody there? You know, that's kind of my responsibility. But again, from our point of view, we can only suggest these things. But what we've done now is we have like an agreement form where you have to basically you have to have a certain amount of stuff in place for us now to really cater for you. So that's kind of something we're looking at. Certainly when shows are back on again, it'll be kind of one of those common practices is to go to the event itself and see how it's operating, maybe talk to a few of the talents. Because other than that, it's very much hearsay. And I don't think that's good enough. And I don't want it to be a thing where we get to the first weekend and we get this, you know, Twitter blowing up again. I think, you know, that you've really got to be careful in the fact of you've got to have the right people in the right positions. to ultimately be responsible for the event. And you know, it's a lot to take on, but it's an absolutely necessary thing to do. You know, I can't be any clearer than that. I mean, it's you know, it's disgusting, some of the stuff that you read about, and you know, you just like, I've got to be honest with you, when that happened, it made me feel like I didn't want to be known as a wrestling fan, quite honestly. I didn't want people that didn't know wrestling to go, oh, what do you do, you know, on the side? You know, oh, I've got this Powered thing. Because, you know, it had a very, very negative, you know, backlash on it. And so, you know, but I'm happy that people are doing the right steps. I'm hoping that, I still think you're going to get bad apples in any walk of life. And to your point, Justin, about the things coming out when, you know, it was nowhere near serious, you know, about I didn't win 2 matches in a row or whatever. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. And I do know what you're talking about there. That really got on my nerves, because it takes away from the true victims here. And that's the thing. And I think it got overlooked a little bit as well. It got overshadowed because, you know, you're talking about politics. And again, some of the stuff is just for wrestling. Some of the stuff happens in any industry, unfortunately. You always get bullies somewhere. In any kind of company, in any workplace, that sometimes is an issue for any industry. But like trainers and coaches, that's where I'd really like to see a lot more progress being made. And hopefully, my friend, hopefully, you know, we get there. But I think it's going to take a long time, you know.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take everybody. Like when I say protect the business, like it's now up to the fans as well.
Yeah.
Just to protect anything from out there. And of course, with anything, people can take it too far. I personally, when I see somebody who is under the age of 18 training at a school, I'm definitely hoping that they are a child of one of the trainers, because otherwise, wait till you're 18. Yeah. And yeah, I know Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy wrestled when they were 14 or whatever, but I think it's different times. We definitely, like I said, you and I couldn't go on the internet and find a training school back in our day, because
you're right. It's a different time. I mean, like when I said, when I got into the business, what happened to me in Wales, right? I mean, that sort of thing now, that would get shot out straight away. But back then, again, I didn't feel like I was particularly bullied. I kind of felt that was, society was so different back then, you know, and it wasn't right. I don't make it right at all. But how I felt at that time, I certainly don't feel like it had a, you know, a bad impact on me, you know, going forward. I think that's just one of those things you live and learn, and you get by it. But I think if that sort of thing happened today, there'd be a huge problem, you know, a massive problem. But I do, it is tough, because I do believe in some of the older ethics of, like you say, protecting the business, and maybe not showing everybody in the back. Sometimes, you know, there is a cutoff point. I think one of my other real things I really dislike seeing is like after parties sometimes, where I'll see wrestlers and fans, and again, you know, drinks being consumed, and everybody's just, their guard is down, and you don't know who's around you and what gets said. And I just think that's just sometimes asking for trouble that, you know, you really don't need. You know, you could just go to another bar. Don't do the afterpay. If you're going to do an afterpay, just have it fans and a couple of wrestlers who maybe, you know, are wiser. They're not going to go totally mashed off their face and say something that they're going to later regret, and anything like that. I think that there's a bit of a danger, but I do feel like fans have almost, they're so involved now. I wonder really if it'll ever go back to the way me and you remember. I kind of would doubt it very much. I wanna well, I'll let you, I mean, if you're finished with this subject, I'll let you close it, but I have another one I'd like to get onto.
Sure. No, just kind of and this is a never ending topic really, because we could talk about it all day, but
sure.
A couple of the points that we, you know, stuff that happened to you and I was considered a rib
Yeah.
and considered a kind of a rite of passage. Now that's a lot of that stuff wouldn't fly today, but where you get into this really hard gray area is when we talk about ribs and stuff. Like if I feel I'm being bullied, I think bullied is in the eye of the person. So that's where it gets to a kind of a touchy gray area. And after parties with wrestling, yeah, I disagree with that, because when this guy was younger and wrestling, a lot of the fans, even though we're already past that, this is like 99, 2000, I remember specifically fans talking to me and going, man, can you talk to me? Stuff I can't really say in the air about some other stuff, but I'm going, dude, I'm a college kid and I'm delivering pizzas on the weekend. I'm not any big deal, but in people's eyes, they can't quite just look at it as for the entertainment, which is cool, which is what you kind of want. But some people have a difficult time separating the character. And
Sure.
And I'm going to back up on when you talk about Daniel Bryan on TV, Bryan Danielson on Total Divas, there's almost a third Bryan Danielson there's probably the real Bryan Danielson, because it's a character of a character, which it was such a deep thing. But yeah, to kind of close off the topic, and by no means anybody watching this do we want to we're closing off the conversation that we're currently having on it. The topic and the conversation needs to continue.
Absolutely.
Beyond is what we agree. And I think that, people staying on top of it, and you will always hear me have that same opinion, protect the business. And unfortunately, like you said, with everything, all different walks of life, we have this stuff happen. And unfortunately, we do have people that will play the victim game and say, hey, I had to lose the last 3 matches. This promoter's an asshole. He's bullying me. Come on. So there's got to be a line there, but we got to walk it very, very delicately. But we've got to err on the side of protecting these victims that have come forward. Next topic. It's your interview, and you get to pick the topic, man. This is crazy.
Well, I because I always forget this when I go on interviews, and I think and you'd be a perfect person to talk to, because a lot of the time the guys I used to interview always were, way off what I wanted to talk about in terms of the era. So it's nice. This is nice for me to be talking to you, somebody that kind of is passionate about the older time. So I'm going to make the most of it here. But it's Andy Kaufman. I am a huge Andy Kaufman fan, not only in wrestling but outside as well. And he, I mention that name in this country sometimes, and people look at me like, "What the hell?" But only this year, actually, in February, which just seems ages ago now, I have to say. But I did a little run-in for a wrestler whose name's Simon Miller, who does What Culture, in one of his matches. And I cost him one of his matches because I'm not his biggest fan, as you do. So you take him out of a ladder. But in that match, part of my stuff was really an acknowledgement to the one and only Andy Kaufman, who could play anybody. I mean, I think he played himself just because he got off on it most of the times. But of course, for those that are not familiar with the story, Andy Kaufman was a comedian. He was very big on Taxi, and he was always sniffing around New York area to begin with about getting into WWF back then with Vince Sr. Vince Sr., of course, not really massively got the idea of having a TV guy coming in and being on his TV show. So I believe it was Bill Apter that put a lot of the stuff together and made that call down to Memphis for him to be on there. And you can watch all those videos now on YouTube. I mean, I tell you what, you talk about things you can get away with now. You go back and watch some of those. My God, the intergender champion, he'd have, most times I'm guessing they were plants in the audience, but of course, those women wanted his head, because he would just be like, I'm stronger than you, women need to be in the kitchen. That's your
Right.
place. And then he'd have a go at the hillbillies. And then, of course, they worked out a match after it. And what a thing that was. And then even after that, they even put an extra angle where you think, you know, he's broke his neck. They work it to the point where he goes to hospital, and they have all the journalists outside. They work them. He wears this for ages, and then they do the Letterman show. For me, I don't know what it is, but I am so drawn to that, what they did between them, because literally it was mainly between those two guys. They were the only, Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman were pretty much the only two that knew what the hell they were doing. But for someone like you, like I'm fascinated to know, in across the pond there, does he get spoken about much? I mean, I never see like WWE touching on him too much. I know that he was never in the WWF back then, but they do go outside of that realm now, like even like the Hall of Famers. Like they don't necessarily have to have been in the WWE. Do you think that like they'll ever give him that any acknowledgement? Like, because you know, I don't know what you think of the Hall of Fame anyway, but I do think it's a bit terrible these days anyway with who's in there. But whenever they say about the celebrity wing, I think, blimey, if there's one guy who should definitely be in there, it should be Andy Kaufman. But yeah, what do you think the perception is like? What is the perception from across the pond? Does Andy Kaufman still get mentioned much, or is that, you know, is it downplayed a lot?